which of course is what we've all been clamoring for Wizards of the Coast to finally put those pesky marshals in their place and prioritize making the spellcasters better. Thank you so much, Wazzy, for recognizing that this was something the game really needed. I've already made a few videos covering the new D&D 24 stat blocks, but beyond the new stat block layout, passive initiative, and the probable departure of the legendary action, there is really one major thing that has kind of gone under the radar, but that I think will probably have the biggest impact on gameplay for 5e. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So here are 2 stat blocks for the wolf. Obviously there are some changes to the stats. The new wolf has higher strength, dark vision and more perception, but has lower AC, damage and no keen hearing and smell. But the biggest change is actually in its bite attack. Before, the wolf's bite required a saving throw to avoid being knocked prone. The new bite just puts a medium or smaller creature on its ass, no save required. This is a design philosophy that we see repeated across all the new monsters in the 5e 2024 Player's Handbook. Attacks that cause effects no longer require a saving throw, they just happen. It's clear that Wizards of the Coast is taking a conscious, deliberate and very firm decision to make it so that you'll never pair an attack with a saving throw requirement, at least for the monsters that we've seen so far. I don't think they've gone on record saying why they've done this, but it's pretty clear that it's probably to make attacks go faster and to make them less complex, especially for new DMs, because the attack just does something. You only have to make the attack roll and then you can move on. Now for some creatures I appreciate this change. It was always a bit silly that you had to roll a constitution saving throw to see how much poison damage you would take from, say, a venomous snake's bite, previously known as a poisonous snake. Of course, it should just deal that poison damage, and then if you had resistance to the poison damage, you can halve it and so on. But when it comes to the wolf and a ton of other creatures, I must admit that I am a bit worried because there's a ton of downsides to this approach to monster design. The first is that it doesn't always feel great, regardless of whether it's the player characters or the DM's monsters that are being pushed around. Just not having a save when there's something affecting your character, especially if it's something your character should have a chance of resisting, like being knocked prone by a wolf, it doesn't always feel great. It's like, hey, don't I get to avoid that thing? No, you don't, because it's part of an attack, so you're just on your ass because you got hit. And some characters are easy to hit, maybe like a barbarian, but shouldn't go down that easily, maybe like a barbarian. So that also leads to the other point, which is that strength saving throws were already a pretty bad saving throw, tied for one of the worst, especially since Wizards of the Coast have started to introduce more intelligence and charisma saving throws as the game has matured. So I think strength is probably the worst saving throw, but if there was any doubt before, it definitely is now, at least if we're looking at the Player's Handbook, because all the saves that have been changed, or almost all the saves, the monsters don't care. If it's part of an attack, they're gonna grab you, they're gonna knock you prone, they're gonna push you back. Doesn't matter how much you've invested in that strength saving throw or that your barbarian is raging and should have advantage against being knocked prone. Then there's also a question of verisimilitude, the word where how realistic it is, and that's because it doesn't always feel realistic. Big bad barbarian, doesn't matter. This wolf is, even though it's maybe 50 kilos or 120 pounds, it can push me on my ass, even though I weigh 4 times as much and I'm 4 times as tall and I'm brawny and I'm big and I'm raging and I don't care. At least for me, it kind of ruins my immersion when something that shouldn't be able to just happen, just happens repeatedly. The biggest issue, however, is balance. Because this design philosophy doesn't just extend to wolves and snake, it goes across the game and extends to every facet of it. In fact, so committed is Wizards of the Coast to this philosophy that they have changed what were previously attack actions to be just actions. This is the case for the Pseudodragon, which used to have a sting attack that had a chance of poisoning you and even dropping you unconscious if you failed a constitution saving throw. Now, this is not an attack anymore, it's just an action. So the Pseudodragon just says, I want to use my stinger on that character, and then the character makes a constitution saving throw to see if it's poisoned or if it even falls unconscious. It doesn't matter if your AC is 10 or 20, it's just going to target your constitution, which again, verisimilitude or whatever we call it, it just breaks my immersion that for some reason its bite attack, it has to go through your armor, but for the stinger, armor doesn't care, AC doesn't care how good you are dodging, doesn't matter, it can just hit you regardless, and you have to make the constitution saving throw. I think that should be reserved for AoE effects or effects that target an area and not a specific creature and needs to puncture the skin. But hey, that's a minor thing, or at least a lesser thing. The bigger thing is that a warlock can have a Pseudodragon as its familiar. And there's a built-in action economy for the warlock and other characters that get access to minions or companions or other creatures they can control. But Sting is no longer an attack, so the Pseudodragon can use this action freely every turn. It's gonna hit a creature no matter what, because it's not an attack. There's gonna be a Constitution save, and it may even drop a creature unconscious, and it has a chance to do this every turn at no cost to the Warlock. Might not be the biggest balance breaker for the Pseudodragon because the saving throw is low and it's Constitution, which most creatures are good at, but it's still something where you can easily see how the Pseudodragon may be suddenly the best familiar that I don't think was a part of the rules, or was intentional at least from Wizards of the Coast. I don't think they plan for the Pseudodragon to use a sting every turn. I think it's one of those things where they haven't really thought through how one change they make in monster design is going to impact how characters function. But it gets worse because Wizards of the Coast design philosophy for monsters in this case also extends to spells, which is why we get spells like Giant Insect, which makes an insect creature that can, with an attack, if it hits, just put a creature's speed at 0, no save, so no legendary resistance either, and it can make this attack multiple times per turn, and it uses your spell attack bonus, which is probably pretty high, so there's a pretty decent chance that it will hit a creature, or it could be a boss monster, something really fierce like a Tarrasque or anything like that, and then you can just prevent it from moving. No save, so there's no way out of it. The DM can't really do anything about it. This is actually a strategy that I've already seen several reports saying completely shuts down boss encounters, because a Giant Insect spell can just keep that boss monster's speed at 0, and you can just take it down from afar, especially if it's an opponent that relies on mobility to do whatever it needs to do. So the fallout from this design philosophy change is that characters that rely on strength and prioritize strength saving throws have gotten worse, while spellcasters or people who can turn into animals or conjure animals that have these special kinds of attacks or features have gotten better, which of course is what we've all been clamoring for Wizards of the Coast to finally put those pesky marshals in their place and prioritize making the spellcasters better. Thank you so much, Wazzy, for recognizing that this was something the game really needed. All jokes aside, I really dislike this change. I don't dislike it in its concept or the design goal it's trying to achieve, making combat faster and simpler, especially for monsters, but I dislike how black and white they've been with it, where then they've not allowed some attacks to still have a saving throw rider, because in some cases it's just really necessary if that's what you want to do, especially when it comes to things like poisons or mental effects or pushing someone prone. I can accept, and I can even encourage that you remove all saving throws that aren't really needed, where there's stuff that shouldn't be resisted, and I could also see a creature like a Tarrasque or an Ancient Dragon, gargantuan creatures, being able to push creatures without allowing for their saving throw, but for a medium-sized wolf to put a potentially 20 strength barbarian on their ass, that to me just breaks immersion, and it also breaks the game's balance, or at least makes the game, I think, in most cases, less fun. And as someone who is designing a lot of monsters, I'm currently designing monsters for Delve, our upcoming book, which you can pre-order in a link somewhere down below. It just doesn't feel right. I'm not gonna use this design philosophy. I'm gonna take what they've brought to the table and say, yeah, we could maybe think about having less attacks with saving throws. It's a nice design goal to have, to make them as simple as possible, but there will be some cases where I'll say, yeah, we need to have a saving throw for this effect, because otherwise it's just not fun and it's just not balanced. And even though Wizards of the Coast have been quite black and white, I feel, especially when it comes to monster stat blocks, we still see that they recognize that sometimes a saving throw is warranted when it comes, for example, to the Topple Weapon Mastery or the Monk's Stunning Strike. There will be some cases where you make an attack and then there is a saving throw, and I think they should allow for that to also be the case for monsters. But who knows, we haven't seen the whole monster manual yet, so they may draw back on this. They may have some creatures that allow for saving throws, but I really wish they would have extended that philosophy to stuff like the wolf and the giant insect as well. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Wizards of the Coast new design philosophy for monsters. What are your thoughts? Do you agree? Do you disagree? That's perfectly fine. We can discuss it below. What are your thoughts on how they're handling monsters and saving throws with attacks in the new revised 2024 edition of Dungeons and Dragons? But beyond that, there's not a whole lot left to say, except thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.